Justin asked me to have a conversation regarding WRBs, and for those of you who aren't in the geekery of home building, probably would be happy to know that that stands for water-resistive barrier, and it's what goes on under your siding, and it's meant to keep water from damaging the sheathing and framing of your home. And this came up because I was on a photo shoot recently where they were installing a spray-applied WRB, which looks a lot like foundation coating.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's what the original product was, correct?
It is. In fact, this company that makes this product has long made foundation coatings, and they adapted that material to put on walls above grade too. And I think it was awesome because there's no seams.
Was that the first time you had seen that application process?
Yes, excepting photos where I've seen other products on houses that had this done, but I'd never seen it installed. And it was really, really, really cool. And it took about 2 days for them to do this entire house that was probably 2,500 square feet.
All right, so if it took 2 days to spray the house, what do you think it would have taken to, for instance, put Tyvek on? But then I guess if we're talking Tyvek, we're talking about taping the seams. If we're comparing it to a spray-on.
Yes. So, as everyone probably knows who listens out here, WRBs are installed very poorly generally, right, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the people who have been installing house wrap or WRBs over the years haven't always had a complete understanding of what the end goal is or how the details all transition into each other. And
when these products were first introduced, they were thought of as air barriers. This was meant to reduce air leakage on your house, but a plastic house wrap doesn't do that easily.
Yeah, no, I find it kind of interesting. I mean, we're excited to see this liquid applied WRB on a house project, and it seems like we're finally starting to get a lot of things that have been in the commercial and industrial world for decades trickle into the home building industry. And like another example is the rock wool exterior, semi-rigid insulation,
which is a mineral wool exterior insulation, right?
Yeah, and a lot of these products seem to have been proven in this other application, but I guess those two worlds just haven't communicated much, or.
And I think that boils down to one reason: cost. This is more costly than house wrap, so builders who are profit-driven, and who isn't, have always looked to plastic house wrap or felt perhaps to make their buildings weather-tight, and oftentimes it just doesn't work well.
So if you're going liquid applied, what type of equipment are you going to need to purchase?
So this company has a large gas-powered sprayer that they use to put this coating on. They also have a man lift and an equipment trailer to pull it around with, and I think it can reach almost 40 feet when it's close to the building. And aside from that, it's pretty simple. They carry like chip brushes with them, and this roll of joint fabric that they use to reinforce the panel seams, so the coating will remain intact with seasonal expansion and contraction.
So every seam gets that.
Every seam and every corner gets this treatment, and they also put customarily a head flashing above the rough opening, so that when the windows get installed, they can tuck the nailing fin under it, and it's nice. Already pretty watertight without doing anything else.
Sure.
And the coating is compatible with virtually any flashing tape that you would use to cover the nailing fin or other penetrations.
Wow, so what does that head flashing look like? Is it just a double layer piece of material?
It's a piece of plastic that they first staple in position to hold it there in a bed of the coating, and then they put the joint tape on the top edge to integrate it into the rest of the weather barrier coating. It's really cool. I was very impressed, and compared to like the many seams in felt paper or the seams on house wrap and the fastening that's done poorly, and you guys see the results all the time, right?
Well, I mean, one thing, when we were discussing this earlier, when I first noticed you were covering that WRB project, you kept saying, "Oh, well, the cost, this is the reason why people don't do this, because of cost." But is it more cost effective than having to go back in and replace all the rotted wood underneath?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, but if you were doing it yourself, I mean, if I was going to WRB my house, I would tape it correctly. I would, shingle style. So, apples to apples. What are we talking about?
And so the cost analysis I did was like house wrap is just under about $1 a square foot to install correctly, use the tape, use the right fasteners with the right fastening schedule. And this is like $1.10 to $1.25, and it's done by a subcontractor.
Huh.
So, I mean,
The one thing that you pointed out, though, is that they like to put it over plywood and not OSB.
well,
Is that right?
He said it's easier. The coating builds up more quickly than, especially with OSB, has a tendency to sink into the material because it's more porous. So
okay.
it takes more of it to coat it to the. I think it's 15 mils they're aiming for, but they can also put this on gypsum sheathing, which, as you mentioned, is more common in commercial construction. So they can use it on OSB. They just like to do it on plywood better because it builds up more quickly.
So I wonder, does it help with the air leakage at all?
You ask such good questions. Yes. In fact, the reason that this builder adopted this product was more to satisfy the 2012 IRC, which requires air tightness testing. In our region, you have to be under 3 air changes per hour. And this product allows them to get there without without a lot of additional air sealing. So they'll have to fix, penetrations where dryer vents and range hoods go out, but none of the normal air sealing, like with spray foam or whatever, is required, which is pretty darn cool too.
How about at foundation transitions?
So they have a detail where they actually will extend the WRB to seal the gap between the first course of sheathing and the foundation. So they actually, part of their contract is to seal that
They
gap.
bridge that? Do they use the mesh tape
They
there?
do, and then they coat it with the coating again.
So basically, on a house that would typically have this installed, you've got spray applied from your footing up to grade, and then you've got exposed concrete, and then you've got a little bit of overlap.
Exactly. Yeah. The materials that go on the foundation are a little bit different than goes on the walls, but they look the same. What have you guys used on your projects with regard to WRBs?
Well, it's been a long time since I've been working in the remodeling industry on a professional level. So I have not been in that world since all the new stuff has come around. But on personal projects, I've basically done like what Colin was talking. If you're a homeowner doing a small project, a well-taped, lapped, carefully cut layer of one of the common house wrap materials.
Yeah, I typically, in the past, used Tyvek, but on my last project, I used the zip system with their tape. So it's not exactly a WRB, but it's built into the system.
But it is the WRB
It
too.
is,
Yeah.
correct. So, so how does that stack up, for instance? Because Tyvek, which is sort of like the outer layer, the green or red part of the zip, I think that's the WRB portion. So on a house that's going to be sprayed, you need the sheathing material. Now you spray it. With the zip, it's sort of one and the same. Did you do a cost comparison there?
We did, and the costs are very close.
Really?
Very close, because the price of zip system sheathing right now that we checked is $29 a sheet, which is as high as I've ever seen it. So obviously, when the panel prices go up, both commodity and zip system, that makes it more expensive to use it.
And when the zip, though, like their chipboard, well, it's not a chipboard, what do you call it?
OSB.
OSB. When their price goes up, is that usually like an industry trend where all OSB is going up?
So you all guys might not know this, but I worked in a lumber yard in the building materials business for a while, and despite zip system not being a commodity, it's made by one company. It's a manufactured product. It follows the commodities market. So OSB and plywood are commodities, and their price goes up and down with demand. So quite intelligently, Huber follows that market to price their sheathing as well.
All right.
So even if there's like gazillions of sheets at the Huber plant, the price still goes up.
What about you? What do you use?
So I'm a fan of felt. My last 2 big building projects, I used 30-pound felt, and I like it because A, it's inexpensive. B, it has a permeability that varies with how wet the material is. So when it's dry, it has comparatively limited permeability, but when it gets wet, its perm rating goes up so it can dry more readily.
But now felt, that's can you even use felt as an air barrier though, or not really?
No, you need to have your air barrier somewhere else.
Yeah.
In my case, a tape sheathing with the felt on top. And it's a pain to work with. The small pieces are a drag. If you have wind, it's very fragile. I've had good success using cap nails to keep it on. And interestingly, the minimum in the building code is number 15 felt, right? Which used to be described as 15-pound felt, but now they've put the number sign before, and it only has to be 7 pounds, and that refers to how much 100 square foot weighs. And anyone will tell you that the material's gotten worse and crappier as time has gone on.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. And so there's no provision actually in the building code for using 30-pound felt, which obviously is twice as thick, but that's what I like to use.
Well, in defense of felt as a water barrier, I can't remember, I think it was Mike Gerton who talked about deck framing or porch framing a long time ago and had done some demolition on an existing porch on a very old house and found that someone had done strips of felt along the tops of the joists. It wasn't consistent. There was some part where maybe somebody had repaired it and taken it out, and he said that all of the floor joists that had the felt strips along the top were intact, and the ones that didn't were rotted.
That's good to know. Oh. And the other thing about felt that I think is pretty darn cool is, okay, so when you have it on the wall and before you've installed your siding, it's going to get wet either from dew or rain or whatever, and then it gets all wrinkly. And when you put the siding on it, it actually has some cavities behind it that allow water to drain if it does get behind it. So, I mean, I think there's a lot to like about asphalt felt for that purpose.
In the Northeast, we open a lot of houses from hundreds of years ago that have it.
And it works pretty darn well.
Yeah, it stood the test of time, I'd say.
So make sure you have a good WRB behind your siding is probably the way to wrap up this conversation, because we talked about the stucco job I was on recently where they were doing testing and all those walls are falling apart. So
yeah, not good. NG.
NG.